Hello everyone, and welcome to our talk on upgrading Linkerd with Flux, a GitOps approach to managing major upgrades. My name's Hayden, and this is my colleague James, and we're cloud platform engineers at Compare the Market. And today, we'll walk you through how we streamline and automate Linkerd upgrades using Flux. Just want to thank Buoyant for having us down, and if anyone does have any questions following this, then our LinkedIns are available on the webpage for this talk. Shameless plug, I know, but you take the opportunities. Let's take a quick look at our agenda. So we'll start with an overview of the Flux release flow, showing how we automate deployments and upgrades in our Kubernetes environment. Then we'll go on to the Linkerd deployment setup, covering how we integrate Linkerd into our GitOps workflow. Next, we'll dive into two real-world use cases, the first being the upgrade between 2.11 and 2.12, highlighting key challenges and solutions. We'll then follow on with another use case, this time upgrading from 2.14 to 2.16 Enterprise, highlighting lessons learned from a more complex migration. And finally, we'll wrap up with a summary, giving you some takeaways and best practices for managing Linkerd upgrades with Flux. By the end of this session, you'll hopefully have a clearer understanding of how we use Flux to automate and simplify Linkerd upgrades. So let's dive in. Let's walk through the Flux release flow, which automates how we deploy updates in our Kubernetes clusters. We start with the container repository. This is where we store Docker files for all our cluster add-ons, such as Linkerd. Renovate looks for updates to the Linkerd version, and when it finds one, it raises an MR within the container repository. Once the MR has been reviewed and merged, an image build and scan is triggered, pushing a new Linkerd image to ECR using semantic versioning. We use this so we have more control over the images. Next, the Flux image reflector picks up the updated image and raises a new MR, this time in the cluster add-ons repository, updating the Linkerd values and customizations based on the Semver range. Once the update is verified, we create a project release, triggering a Flux reconcile within our non-prod clusters, deploying the new Linkerd image as part of a release that meets the Semver range for non-prod. When validated in non-prod, we then update the exact release version to all production clusters. This process ensures a controlled, automated rollout of new versions while keeping deployments consistent and reliable.
So the add-ons repository mentioned in the previous slide contains all the add-ons that we deploy to our Kubernetes clusters via Flux. In the image above, or to the left and right, we have files and the structure for the Linkerd control plane, the Linkerd CRDs, and Linkerd Buoyant. The add-ons base directory contains all of the config files for each add-on, whilst the base config directory contains the base YAMLs to deploy each add-on. Each of our Kubernetes clusters will then reference the base config files with their customization YAML, depending on which add-on we want deployed to each cluster. And in the above image here is a screenshot of the Linkerd base YAML within our base config directory. As you can see, this is deploying the Linkerd CRDs customization, as well as the Linkerd control plane customization and also, as you can see, there is a depends on spec on the Linkerd control plane, which has a dependency on the Linkerd CRDs. So now we're going to do a quick talk on some of the recent Linkerd upgrades that we have done. First, starting from going from 2.11 to 2.12. As some of you may know, this Linkerd upgrade had quite a break-in change in that the Linkerd 2 Helm chart was split into the Linkerd CRDs and Linkerd control plane Helm charts. This meant that with using Flux, it wasn't as easy as just updating an image. We had to do some manual intervention. On the right, you can see the steps that we kind of took. This process took a bit of time to sort of get right and to sort of test out. We tested this out in numerous test clusters before we could then roll this through non-prod and production. Because we are using Flux, Buoyant's managed Linkerd offering at the time didn't really fit our use case, so we had to come up with our own way of doing this. On the one sort of issue, or not issue, but one sort of blocking point was that the documentation provided by Buoyant didn't really cater for Flux, so we kind of had to come up with our own way of doing this, or to tailor it to our use case. Before attempting production, as I said, we put this through all the test clusters, and before upgrading with Flux, it was important that we first did two things. The first was to suspend the Linkerd Helm release. This is so that Flux doesn't then try to reconcile any of changes that we make. The second was then to turn the prune option within the Linkerd customization spec from true to false, which then meant that Flux isn't trying to delete any resources that we currently have on the cluster. So once that was in place, we then, in step 2 and step 3, these commands were taken from the Linkerd documentation, which then basically updates the CRDs and any other resources with the correct annotations that can then be adopted with the new Helm release. We then created customization files for the Linkerd CRD's Helm chart, the Linkerd control plane, whilst then commenting out the actual Linkerd customization. We then ran our cluster pipeline, which then got Flux to reconcile the new versions, the new Helm charts. We did a bit of validation by checking the CRDs and everything was up to date. And then once that was done, we then deleted, with a bit of cleanup, deleted the Helm release of Linkerd, as well as deleting the Linkerd secret. Once that was, before we did that, we also updated other add-ons that had a dependency on Linkerd to go from Linkerd to Linkerd control plane, and then we did the cleanup. And that was kind of, the upgrade that we did.
Apologies that we keep clearing our throats. It's what happens after a long day of talking. So I'm going to give a quick recap of the 2.14 to 2.16 enterprise upgrade that we did more recently and some of the bumps that we hit along the way. First off, naming conventions. Moving to Buoyant Enterprise meant a new chart naming structure, with Enterprise now part of everything. That change cascaded through our configs and caused integration issues where service names no longer lined up. Secrets management was probably one of the biggest ones. With Enterprise, a license key is now required at pod startup, so no key, no pod. Since we manage everything via Flux, we had to ensure that the secrets were injected at runtime. The Linkerd documentation didn't fully support this kind of GitOps setup, which meant some trial and error on our side. We then hit issues with Helm chart discrepancies. There were mismatches between what was on Artifact Hub and what we were using with Cert Manager, plus the Helm templates themselves had breaking changes. For example, new indentation, refactors, which required hands-on debugging to get our customizations working again. To manage risk, we actually spun up extra ephemeral clusters to test thoroughly before hitting production. That actually let us safely jump from 2.14 to 2.16 without hitting every version in between. And all through this, one thing which we've mentioned a couple of times was that the official documentation didn't actually fully cater to this GitOps workflow. Key differences like how secrets are managed and how Flux supplies config weren't covered. So we had to fill in those gaps ourselves and also fed that back to Buoyant once we completed the upgrade.
Okay, so to summarize, managing major sort of upgrades with Linkerd, upgrades of Linkerd through Flux does work well. However, once you start getting breaking changes and structural changes, then a lot of manual intervention then comes into play, which can get a bit tricky and take time to then iron out a process that's ready for production to prevent any downtime. Something that we haven't mentioned is the Flux image reflector. That's something that can be used through the lower environments and can be used in production depending on the appetite of the business or the users. And as we mentioned, one sort of thing that was a bit of a stumbling block was documentation, and it was a sort of coming up with our own way of getting around that to be able to do the upgrade. But overall, Flux is a good way of managing these upgrades. As long as the documentation is very Helm related, so as long as you understand Flux, then you can kind of understand the documentation and get the upgrade working. And then the most important thing is to test this out in lower environments. We spun up so many test clusters that we probably went way over our budget, but we ended up getting a good solid process that we were happy with no downtime. So thank you all for listening for this quick high-level talk on upgrading Linkerd via Flux. Thank you. Take that.